In this region, there's an area, although it's part of the continent we know as Europe, feels distinctly separate from its neighboring countries in Northern and Western Europe. When I say divided, I don't necessarily mean divided by a physical wall or geographical boundaries. I'm referring to something else, something invisible yet felt by many people living in these countries on a daily basis. I'm talking about the vast economic disparity between Eastern Europe and the rest of the continent. This is the reality of Europe, where the eastern half, once controlled by communism and leading in many areas, now lags behind its western counterparts. They almost have the same geography, they both have a shared history dating back from the Roman Empire, and at some points also share a culture that can be identified as identical. But that's also where the similarities end. Additionally, Eastern Europe's unemployment rate stands at 6.2%, slightly higher than the 5% rate observed in Western Europe. Eastern Europe's GDP per capita stands at $21,000, while in Western Europe it reaches $42,000. In Western Europe, the inflation rate is significantly lower, standing at 3.2%, compared to approximately 7.3% in Eastern Europe, and the list goes on and on. By almost every metric that we can compare these two parts of the continent, in most cases it comes out that the western part of Europe is a better place economically on paper. So why can two parts of the same continent be so drastically different? This is Eastern Europe, and these are the countries that were or still are ruled under communism. A specific pattern emerges. Countries like Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and many others were once under communist rule. Yet, when we rank them based on their GDP per capita, they consistently rank at the bottom. From 1989 to 1991, the winds of democracy swept through Eastern Europe, presenting a new era of hope and political evolution. As the dust settled, these nations, along with many others in Eastern Europe, proudly joined the prestigious ranks of the European Union and NATO. However, the shift from communism to democracy proved to be a challenge. As the way countries were governed changed and the threat of strict control disappeared, the economy continued to be very difficult. Just becoming a democracy didn't automatically solve the complicated problems of the economy. Communist countries typically have centrally planned economies, which means that the government controls most aspects of the economy, including production, distribution, and pricing. When a country decides to transition to a democracy, and with this change comes a new economic system, a market-based economy. In this system, businesses are privately owned and prices are determined by supply and demand. This sudden shift can be unsettling. People are no longer sure what to expect, and businesses are struggling to adapt to new rules of the game. The economy becomes unstable, and it takes time for everyone to adjust. On top of that, there are other challenges. Communist governments are often corrupt and inefficient, and these problems need to be addressed in order for the new economy to thrive. Also, many people in the country have never lived in a market-based economy, so they lack experience and knowledge to make financial decisions. Despite these challenges, there are still many countries that have successfully transitioned from communism to democracy and achieved strong economic growth. Poland, for example, has become one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. Poland's economic journey from communism to democracy has been marked by a remarkable progress, particularly in terms of GDP per capita. Under communist rule, Poland's economy was stagnant and inefficient, leading to a low GDP per capita of around $1,700 in 1990. Following the transition to a market economy, Poland's GDP per capita experienced significant growth, reaching $22,000 in 2023, representing a staggering increase of over 1,200%. But beneath the surface, there's a hidden cost to the transition. The introduction of democracy and capitalism has led to people feel unsafe, and the support for the new transition is slowly fading away by the people. Some people even felt better off 30 years ago than they do now. They are not satisfied with the political system, jobs, and inequality. There's a widespread perception that politicians and business people have benefited personally from the fall of communism, while ordinary people have not. While perception may paint a rough picture, the reality is that the gap between the rich and the poor, as measured by the Gini coefficient, has been widening ever since the fall of communism. But what causes this enormous gap between the rich and the poor will change your perspective. In the shadows of Eastern Europe lies a stark truth between the rich and the poor that has been widening relentlessly since communism's downfall. At the heart of this lies corruption, a pervasive force that has seeped into the very fabric of Eastern Europe societies. The corruption in Eastern Europe is a product of an incorrect system. Weak institutions rooted in the legacy of communism provide fertile ground for corruption to flourish. The police and judiciary, often understaffed and underfunded, struggle to enforce the law and hold the corrupt accountable. Citizens disappointed by years of misrule and unfulfilled promises, which means their faith in government have shattered. According to some statistics, Eastern Europe ranks below the average score of corruption on Earth. One of the most notorious corruption cases in Eastern Europe is the Bulgarian octopus scandal, which unfolded in 2013. This network of high-ranking politicians, businessmen, and organized crime figures allegedly manipulated public purchases, withdrew billions of euros from the national wealth, and pulled off unreasonable influence over the judiciary and law enforcement. The scandal sent shockwaves through the Bulgarian society, exposing the depths of corruption that had infiltrated the country's highest ranks. But it's not fair to say that corruption is the only thing that is affecting the economy of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is a region brimming with potential, finds itself heavily dependent on exports, with a staggering 62.1% of its GDP generated from selling goods and services to other nations. This figure is far greater than the export-driven economies of the rest of Europe, where the average export to GDP ratio stands at a mere 42.1%. Poland and Hungary, champions of Eastern Europe's export, where their main focus is manufacturing, machinery and electronics, while Romania and Ukraine proudly have the agricultural skill, exporting vast quantities of wheat, corn and sunflower oil. At first glance, this reliance on export makes you think that it is a great thing. This will create jobs and attract new foreign investment. However, beneath this lies a hidden vulnerability. An over-reliance on export can leave a country dangerously exposed to the global market. A sudden downturn in global demand, a shift in trade policies, or even a fluctuation in currency values can send shockwaves through an export-reliant economy, triggering job losses, economic instability, and decline in living standards. A great example of this is the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The disruption of transportation routes, particularly through the Black Sea, has severely hampered Ukraine's export capabilities. In 2022, Ukraine's export plummeted by 32% compared to the previous year, with agricultural export experiencing a staggering 42% decline. This dramatic fall is a direct consequence of the conflict's impact on supply chains and global market uncertainty. Not only that, but we also know that investing in infrastructure, education, and innovation to secure the economic future of Eastern Europe, but this is where things get even worse. Eastern Europe's infrastructure is aging and poorly maintained, which is making it more difficult for businesses to operate and for people to access essential services. There are estimates that say that the region needs to invest an additional 400 billion euro per year in infrastructure to close the gap with Western Europe. The education system are also struggling to meet the demands of modern economy. Many students lack the skill they need to succeed in the workforce, and there is a shortage of qualified teachers. According to estimates, Eastern Europe has the lowest rate of education completion in the developed world. Not only that, but innovation is another area where Eastern Europe is lagging behind. The region has a relatively low level of research and development spending, and there's a lack of collaboration between businesses and universities. The lack of investment in infrastructure, education, and innovation is having a significant impact on Eastern Europe's economic competitiveness. This will keep businesses away, which will just make it hard to stimulate the economy and growth. As a result, other countries continue to invest billions of dollars in their countries, while the gap between Eastern Europe and its neighboring countries keeps getting bigger and bigger. What also is keeping Eastern Europe back is the regional conflict and the political instability that it faces. Right now, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict is obviously making it hard for Ukraine to maintain a healthy and growing economy. But that's not the only conflict in the region. The conflict between Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo also makes it hard for the countries to settle and focus on what is really important. Whenever a conflict like these happen, that would often lead to destruction of physical infrastructure such as roads, bridges, railways, and factories. This destruction can take years or even decades to repair, and it can severely hinder a country's ability to produce goods and services. Also, supply chains and trade routes will get disrupted, which will lead to shortages of essential goods and services, which leads us to the issue that some of these countries in Eastern Europe have. And let's not forget the displacement of thousands of people and loss of labor, which will make it even harder to achieve a great economy. Being reliant on Russia's gas, oil and coal they ship to Eastern Europe and Europe in general doesn't make it easy either. On one hand, Russia acts as a significant portion of the continent's energy needs. On the other hand, this dependence on Russian energy imports has exposed Europe to vulnerabilities arising from geopolitical tension and market fluctuations. In fact, Eastern Europe's reliance on Russian gas is at least 40% of their natural gas imports. Countries like Lithuania are 100% reliant on Russian gas, where 70% of all imported gas to Poland comes from Russia. But why did almost all these countries rely fully on Russian gas? During the Cold War, Eastern Europe countries were part of the Soviet Union, where they all were part of strong energy ties with Russia. What Russia also did was to build pipelines, which will make the distribution of gas easier and more affordable. The other option they have is to get gas from the United States, which is far more expensive because of the shipment. Instead of using pipeline like Russia, they ship it with big container ships, which of course not only make it more expensive, but also make the shipment time longer. This over-reliance on Russian gas has really questioned Eastern Europe's sovereignty, and every day that goes, it becomes harder for them to become part of the global economy while trying to protect their independence and economic interest. There's a balance of trying to have sovereignty on one hand while also having partnerships with other countries with the other hand. And it seems like you can't have both, because once you rely too much on other nations, it will be used against you if you don't act in their will. The world is becoming connected, and conflicts that may once have seemed isolated now have the potential to spiral into wider wars. That's also maybe happening with the ongoing conflict with Israel and Palestine. If that video sounds interesting, then don't forget to watch it right here.